Today we have a very exciting topic. The Loki Rework was actually partially leaked onto PTS. It's not the whole thing, it's not everything that he's going to do, but the animations of his abilities were shown, and there's actually a lot of information that we can get from these alone, a lot of details about how the abilities work in their current state. They're still subject to change, of course, but so far I think there's some very interesting stuff that is worth talking about. I'm also, by the way, very excited to edit this video. You will probably see why. First up, thanks to Andy Fox for pointing out to me that these animations have been found. I wouldn't even have seen that thread otherwise, because it was not that popular. It was posted by Reddit user RuWHX, and it linked to a channel, a YouTube channel just called Alex. I will link the video down below as well, where you can actually see Loki's new animations in-game. First of all, keep in mind these are probably not the completely final animations. There's always room for more polish on animations and stuff further down the road. They're probably some earlier testing version, but they show us a lot already. Also, you will see some black smoke around Loki. This is not part of his kit or anything. That is just a fountain skin, and on PTS, on Jungle Practice, that is always active while you're in this middle area. So that's not related to the skin at all. What is related, however, are the rest of the animations. Now, if we're looking at Vanish here, there is actually no difference at all. That is because Vanish doesn't really get major changes. The plan for it was to just get a slightly different interaction when being damaged, where he's briefly revealed when taking damage, but nothing that inherently changes the ability as a whole. So, as such, no changes here. But if we look at the second ability, we actually see significant differences. The ability seems to have kept the same type of targeter, where you place it in front of you like the decoy, but instead of placing a decoy, you now place a weeping Loki. The initial plan for this ability was to place a version of Loki that has poison dripping into his face while being bound by chains. I imagine that just ended up being a bit too morbid, and they just scaled it down a bit to this weeping version that's on some black stuff. And the purpose of this was to poison enemies around this location and take damage over time, as well as blind them eventually. I think the blinding aspect will definitely remain based on the animation we're seeing here. We're not really seeing poison. That black stuff could be what is doing the damage over time instead. We would imagine that the ability will work out roughly the way that it's described in the earlier plans for Loki at least. What is also worth noting is that this ability has a health bar. The initial plan for this was to not make it targetable at all by anything really, and the Loki players' feedback for that wasn't exactly positive, because they wanted the mechanic to body block enemies with that, or potentially also draw aggro from structures at least, and that seems to now be implemented. Hyris already mentioned back then that they would consider that as an option, and it seems that now this will be targetable again. Maybe it has limited health, so maybe you can actually destroy it. That could be a possibility, but it seems to at least have a place on the map, even though we don't see it body blocking anything here. That is interesting in various ways, because it gives certain benefits to Loki, like the body blocking, but also certain downsides, like for example being heavily countered by Naja's ring toss, because you can bounce it between the decoy and Loki. So how exactly it'll turn out and what exactly it'll do is another question. What I don't think it'll do is taunt the minions again, because I think they want to get rid of that mechanic and move his AoE damage to the third ability instead. And why do I say that? Because we can see the third ability right here. The animation for this ability is completely changed. In this case, again, a reminder that this might be a very early draft, because the animation doesn't quite match with the attack in front of it, so it looks a bit rough around the edges. What we can see here is that it's a flurry of attacks instead of a single attack. In an animation afterwards, we actually see the old version. I would assume that this is because this is still PTS and it kind of has both versions at the same time now or something, and it's not actually intended this way. In the original rework plans, Hyris stated that this ability would be reworked into Flurry of Daggers, a cone ability that's relatively narrow with a medium range, and I think that part matches the description very much. In addition, the ability was meant to last roughly 1.5 seconds, which also matches what it is now. I think it might actually be slightly less even. What seems to have changed since the initial plans is the amount of attacks. It was meant to strike 4 times first, and it looks like, based on these quick swings, it's actually 6 strikes now. That does make a difference for certain items. For example, if you're building reinforced troops or reinforced greaves, then you will stack more defense while being hit by this, so effectively you take less damage. On the other hand, it can also reduce certain protection, so, you know, it has pros and cons. Things for the ultimate have also changed a little bit. What you can see here is 2 parts of an animation, the initial Loki ult basically, and then a forward cone attack shortly afterwards. This does not quite match the original plan. The minor rework first of all stated that it increased the time between the teleport and the damage and stun. I'm not sure if the time has actually increased. Unless this is not the final version of the ultimate, it seems like the initial part with the initial damage, but no longer the stun, will apply in the same time as now. But the second part of the ability has a bit of a delay. It is not a massive delay, as we can see, it's very quick after the first part, but the original plan was to have 2 firing phases. In the first one, Loki would teleport to a location and then damage an enemy that he hits there and cripple them first. And then the follow-up attack would be the one dealing additional damage and stunning. And as we can see here, if the first ability part here does not stun, then you actually have a fair amount of time to activate your Aegis. If you have old man reaction times like me, it may not necessarily be enough and you may maybe be hit by the second part still, but either way you will have more time to react and you don't have to have this like almost instant luck reflex that you have to have right now in order to activate Aegis in time for Loki's damage. At the same time, keep in mind that his follow-up damage in general will work differently, because you won't have the instant attack cancel, aim strike kind of stuff afterwards anymore while you're stunned, as aim strike in itself works differently too. So it's gonna be a big question how the damage values play out overall. And we can see here that he has a fair bit more AoE damage than before, but none of that AoE damage is particularly massive. Like the only big deal for teamfights, I think, will be the decoy, and maybe a very clustered up enemy team can lead to a multi-hit assassinate, which could lead to multiple targets being stunned, and that can be massive. But he's still not a super teamfight focused character based on what I'm seeing so far. What's also relevant for the ultimate specifically is that it was initially meant to only work when you target a god. So basically, you would either teleport and not do anything after that, or you teleport to a target and then you do the second strike after you stunned them, or after you crippled them rather, after you hit them with the ult hit. From what we can see here, you don't need a target for the second part of the ultimate. It'll be enough to just hit the air and the second part will go off. So even if you miss the initial part of the ultimate, you can still do damage with the second part and potentially stun. Maybe you have to hit both parts of the ult to actually get the stun though. That's another question that we'll have to find out when this goes live. Overall, it looks interesting and I'm excited to see it in game. I don't know if we'll see it with the next patch, because next patch should be a new god, and I would be surprised if they put the next god as well as the Loki Rework on the same patch, because then the patch afterwards would have significantly less content, unless they have something else planned for the patch afterwards, that is. But I would think this is like a 7.11 patch type thing, but we'll see. Again, I was wrong the first time. I thought we're gonna see it in this patch, and it actually didn't happen. So who knows how much work is still going into it. And last time we checked, Hyras said they still need a little bit of time. I hope you enjoyed this little update, which we hopefully see more about in the future. If you're new to the channel, click the sub button and maybe the bell so you get notified of that as well. And other than that, see you for the next one soon. SLOTH, out.